In the last video, we made this side panel, and we have the view model now creating data and also refreshing when we go between tabs and load. Next up, we want to bind this list with the actual print list data and handle, say, deleting the items from the list. So let's just take a look at how to do that. The first thing we'll want to do is bind this list, because at the moment it's not bound to anything here. This will have the actions page view model, and inside there we have this print list. It's an observable list of another view model, which is what we then want, so that we can bind each item inside to the actions print view model. So for that, we'll just use item source, and we'll do binding to, you can see it doesn't know the data context. So we'll go to here, x::data type, and it will be the view model. So we'll need the VM namespace, which we don't currently have. XML namespace, VM equals batch process 3.viewModels, and now the data type can be a view model. And in here, this is, remember, not the print view model yet, it's still the actions page view model. So the top level is a page view model, it now knows about it here. And now we can bind to the print list. It's not finding that, even though it's right there. So let's just compile and see why it's complaining. Have we missed something obvious here? Yep, we never tagged this with observable property. So now it should find it. There we go. And we should have, if we take a look, recompile, and this list now has nothing at the minute, but we have no design time data context either. So again, we'll do that. This can be a view model actions page view model. And if this has the parameterless constructor, which it currently does, and this is a common thing now where we have views that want view models, but we want to do just a certain thing in the design time. So instead of doing what we've done before, which is to have the constructor with no parameters becoming the design time only, that's not very explicit. I think what we'll do is go into the page view model. Let's add an abstract method that we're just going to force to be overridden for now. So we'll do a protected abstract method, and it won't return anything, and we'll call it on design time constructor, something like that. We'll have to make the class abstract as well, because now it needs to be overridden. Is this now going to cause issues with all this? Just got to do abstract partial, maybe. There we go. And now we can change this constructor style from here, which we're going to have to do, to a normal constructor here. We'll set the page name up to the page name, and now in here, detect design time. And to detect the design time, there is something in Avalonia, which is avalonia.controls.design.is in design mode. So what we can say is, if is design mode, then we'll call on design time constructor. So now this will fire only if we're on the design time constructor. And to be honest, what we can actually do is, instead of making this abstract, let's just make it virtual so it's not forced. And then it can be overridden by the classes that want to use it, not forced. Now we have a few warnings here. This one is saying it can be protected, which is fine, it can be. This one is warning us of virtual members in a constructor, and the reason for this is when we have, say, a class here. This is the derived class, this is the base class. When this gets constructed, it will run the constructor of the base class first, then the constructor of the derived class. But the exception here is, because we're running the base class's constructor, but then calling a virtual function inside of this constructor, this will call the derived class, so say this class, its implementation of this method. So what's going to happen is you're going to initialize this class first, but then you're going to call a constructor, or rather a virtual method, on this class before the constructors even run. So it's kind of a backwards scenario. But in this case, because the only concept we want to do in the design time is to typically fill this model with some information, We'll just see if it works, and it's not mission critical in a sense. So if things fail or go wrong in the designer, we know what's going on. It's not that important. So let's just see if this works first, and that will be in this class here. If we override on design time constructor, and in here, in fact, we can just leave it as this style, and we'll just call the fetch print list. So every time the constructor gets created, we'll update the list in the designer. And that obviously, now we've changed it to a virtual, it needs the body. This now isn't set like that. And let's see if that still compiles. It does. So now, do we actually see? There we go. Yeah, we see this updated view, although it's messed up for another reason. It looks like we've got an infinite loop of views inside of views here. But the key is this binding now is working, which should mean this design time constructor is being called. And if we just comment this out to confirm that, let's no longer call that method. You can see it doesn't bind. And if we run this, you can see it does bind. And then we could even double check that by, instead of doing this, we could make a different list with just say one item, just to prove this is working. And now if we compile, does the designer get one? And it does. So it's now got one item. So we know it's this call that's running, and it's only running in designer. I think that's kind of a nice implementation for if you want to override and run something just on the design time to create, a designer-friendly view model. Next, we'll move on to this actual problem, which is the view is obviously completely messed up. What this will be caused by is our view locator, because what we're doing is binding this list box to a print list. But if we look at the print list in the action page view model, it's an observable collection of view models. So then when it gets down to the items inside, which we don't yet have, it's going to try and resolve the content of each item, and that content is ultimately then a view model. So that's going to pass into this view locator. And we should be able to see that by running this, and we'll hit this view model when we have an actions print view model. So you can see settings page. I go over to the actions page, you've got the actions page view model, and that's actually not updating. And that's because I presume here we've set the underlying class when it should be the underlying property rather, when it should be the observable property. We can make this private as well from the IntelliSense. And if we run that again, let's just double check that's currently working. And then we go to actions. We now get an invalid cast exception, which is coming from the view locator. So now it is working in the application, but this is where we have this issue with converting data. And then this is where we get this issue. So you can see that's caused by that. All we need to do to fix that is to not match here on specific view models. We have a page view model, so we could just match to the page view model instead of the view model base. So we could just change this to here, and let's see if that's enough to get this working. This spins up, go to actions, and there we go. Now we have the actual view models. Clicking the view model now is cannot change source while updates in progress. So we have some other issue going on here. And why is that? We're calling refresh on tab changed, on selection changed. So this is where we said if this selection changed, this is actually capturing selections in what looks like the entire content inside, not just there. So if we tab it out, so these are selections being fired. If we go to Actions tab on selection change, so you click here, it's catching those events. But this is where we mentioned before, it might catch other events. If we click that, it's capturing that as a selected event. So we need to make sure this is only being captured when a tab changes. Let's just take a look at how we can figure that out. And that will have to happen here before we go in. So we just let that crash a minute. Tab out, tab in, and we'll want to capture there, not here. We want to see what we can do. So this is a tab control, is the sender, The source is tab control there. So I'm going to presume and hopefully the source is different. So we click here, the sender is the tab control still. The source is there, a list box. So we need to check the source. So we might be able to do e.source equals the actions tab control maybe. Do that, otherwise, or rather, if e.source equals that, and it's telling us to do equals like this. So let's see if that will capture only the tab changes of the actual tab control. Go into the actions page, that's the tab control, tab control, tab control, and now selections in here. There we go. So that's now fixed that. And we finally have a list bound to the view model. We now want to make the custom items inside of here to match our mockup like this. So a fairly shallow list of information with a little delete button here, and then this new action button will tackle after. So these are a little bit oversized, maybe. We could keep it the same to match here, but I think we'll also make a slimmed down version, so maybe like a slim list that just reduces the size of these. Because we're only using it here at the minute, we'll just code it straight into this view, and we can always abstract it out afterwards. So let's style this print view now. We want to style inside this list box. We can do that by doing the list box dot item template, and IntelliSense has been lost completely there. That will be a data template, and that will have a data type. And inside of here, this will be the view model action print view model. That will get us now something we can construct in here per item, and you can see the items are still in there, just with nothing showing. So we'll want a grid in here because we want a delete button on the right side. So we'll just do a grid with column definition of auto and then fill, or the other way around actually. We want the fill at the front and auto at the end where the delete button's going to be. Inside this grid, we'll have the label, which is just going to display the job name, I believe it is. There we go. And now you can see that's updated with the actual information. It's got quite a lot of padding there that I definitely think we don't want, but we'll, like I say, fix that in a minute. We'll do margin 0, padding 0. So that removes them all. I still think we want to go slightly shallower because this list is going to have quite a lot of items in. Yep, there we go. A less top and bottom margin. So a really compact view because this will have quite a few things in. And then after the label, the only thing we want is a delete button. So this will be a button with grid.column of 1. So it appears in the second column here, which is right. See that text isn't aligning vertically center as well. So let's just add vertical alignment center. There we go. Probably put these on new lines. It's better, easier to see. We want the button to have inside a label with the class for icon only. And then the content for a bin is the ampersand hashtag X, and then we can type in the code, which for the phosphor one is E4A6 semicolon. And there's the trash can we want. This wants to be the outline, so it wants to be icon, outline. We don't actually have a class for that. We go to labels. Yep, we don't have a class. So all we want in there is a class in here somewhere. We'll put it after icon only. We'll just copy this. And we'll have the label for icon outline. And all we want to do is set the font family to phosphor instead of phosphor fill, because by default they are outlines. And hopefully that will get us an outline. There we go. We can see this is quite padded as well, this button. So I think we have a class for small. And there's a small button. We still have something wrong with the padding, and that's probably just because this icon isn't set right. And you can see our icon only class here for the button is also wrong, so we want to fix that. That will be, where are we? This button with an icon only inside. And that will be just less padding inside the labels. Icon and icon only. So this is where we don't have an icon only class separate, which we should. So we'll copy and paste that. Do icon only here. And we will want to change the padding probably. And this was to fix, to be honest, the other font. So this is probably why it's moved, because we have a different font. If we copy that over, say it's the margin, we've got a right margin of 5. And for icon only, I reckon we just want no margin. If we go to the buttons and compile, you can see that's fixed the icon. So now hopefully there's the button. And I still don't think it's quite... Well, it is small enough, probably, the button. Maybe it wants to be smaller, but we don't want any margin or padding. Actually, we need a bit of padding. And we probably want to set the width. This is just like a custom. In fact, we should probably just make this a smaller button. Instead of doing all this custom stuff, that's fine, but we probably want to be smaller than that as well to really tie into this. I don't know whether it's so much just the... it's mainly just the margin, isn't it? So yeah, actually, it's removing the margin from everywhere except probably left and right. So top and bottom margin removed, maybe left. That one actually is going under. That's just because the width of this isn't large enough to see. But I think that's probably okay, to be honest. Maybe just the left and right. So maybe actually do all 4. Right, we want -4 as well to go close to the edge like that. Top, we want -4. There we go. So that'll do, I think, for the... Still keeping the view compact. You can see if we delete this, it goes a lot more compact. In fact, yeah, why don't we just make it smaller? Let's make another button class that's even smaller. So we have small, and then smaller. And then if we look at now this class, we can just make everything even smaller. Copy the small class, make one that's smaller, make the font size maybe 12, and you can see it's got smaller there. The corner radius probably a little bit smaller as well, maybe 5, change that to smaller. The padding, we have probably 3, 0, 3, 0. Want it to be really compact. Let's go back to this one, make it smaller, remove the margin, and compile. There we go, so we're getting smaller, but why do we still have... We want this to be touching. See how you've got a margin on the top and bottom? That's not removing the margin. I want to know why there's a margin appearing here. Is it something to do with this label? No, so you see how the button set the height to 40. You've got this natural padding. So this padding must be baked into this control. And you can see the padding just above and below the label. And that's even with this padding, this margin negated. So you've got this extra padding regardless inside of the default template probably of this list box. So we don't want to add that to the button class directly because this is specific to this list class. So what we will also need to do is a top and bottom margin of -4 as well to make it the same as the label. And then I think if we go much smaller than that, we're not going to be able to click the button. So I think that's where we'll leave that button. That's probably perfectly fine there. And we'll just actually nudge the margin over still on the right side, just to suit this layout. We'll want to colour this button now, so purple isn't really effective. We'll probably want a danger button. So we go into the button styles again and go to alert. Actually, we have a button called alert. Yeah, we want one called danger. So we'll copy that, do danger. And then if we scroll down, we can see we've got one danger, which has no style yet. It's just going to be the alert button, copied, pasted, and rename everything to danger. And then where we have alert here, we'll have danger. And now all we need to do is make the style in the app, which is again, copy and paste the alert gradients, which are here. Copy them too, paste, rename this to danger, rename this to danger. And now we'll just change these colors. And I've just noticed we actually have a warning gradient up here. So what are we using that for? Oh, we made one and never used it, bad looks. So we will delete that one, but we'll use that color. So in the danger gradient, we have that. And then for the hover effect, we just want to be slightly lighter. So the lighter color, we'll probably just add 2 of the other colors to lighten that up. And then this will probably darken down slightly and lighten up slightly at that side. So that gives us a very subtle color change. I guess there's a danger button, really subtle. We go back to this now, we should be able to add to the class, danger, and there we go, that's nice. So we have a really subtle button. Let's just run this and see if it works. Go to actions, and there we go. We have a nice little delete button. Obviously we don't want this to be shown all the time. I think when we want this button to be shown is, say, when we select the item, so it's visible. We'll just add to this button the same as the label, the vertical alignment, just in case one goes bigger than the other. Say the text ever goes bigger, we want them to both be centered. And now we want to bind the buttons is visible to, say, is selected. So we do need to bind this here, actually. And that will keep this as selected linked in the view model, but we also need to bind this visibility to the visibility of the selected of this item. So we need to do like a double binding. The simplest trick for that then will be, let's step outside of the item template, and we want to do the listbox.styles inside of here. Now we can do a style just like any other with a selector on the listbox item. So we want to style the listbox item now, this listbox item we've created here. And we need to tell it what the type is because we're going to do binding. So x.dataType is vm.actionsPrintViewModel. In here now we can do a setter with a property of is selected. So that's the property of if this item is actually selected. And then the value now, in here we can do a binding. So if we now bind, it's going to bind to the view model, and we're going to tell it that it is selected. So it's going to bind to the view models is selected and link this correctly with when the item's actually selected, and then also bind it to the button's visibility. And that, yeah, well, it works, but we remove that. Yeah, you see, so with the button, it's because the list is a lot larger, and without it, the text is smaller. So the problem is, ultimately, it's one. You can do opacity instead, but we probably just want to make this button not expand the label. So we want to make sure this label, which should be working still, there we go. We want to make sure this label isn't smaller than when the button's not there. So you can see it's still slightly smaller. And to be honest, we probably just want to make this less. But then it's still not centered. Oh yeah, bottom and top we haven't matched. Actually, that's probably going to be too much now, but a little bit too less. 4, 4. That's still even. Still a little bit to go. Very close now. So I'd say if we leave it at that with the extra padding slightly, so basically leave the label as default, the button with this -4, -4, -6, everything seems to be centered and okay. Now if we paste back in the as visible, when we select, there we go. So now it doesn't randomly resize. And we get this nice kind of button appearing. Let's just run that and make sure it looks right and works in the app. Go to Actions, and there we go. So I think that's a nice effect. This will obviously all fill with all the information, like all the details of each of these things we're selecting. So this will fill this side. And now we want this button to do something. And this is where a lot of people struggle straight away with view models, is we're bound to, ultimately, a single item here, which is part of this list inside of here. And each individual item has no awareness of this top level container that hosts the item that we want to delete. So we know the correct place for the delete function is in this top level view model. So let's just start by adding that because we know that's where it should be. So this can be a private, we'll make it public so it can be accessed anyway. Public void, and we'll call this delete print item. And this will want the ID of the item passing in, no more. This becomes a relay command. And then inside of here, we just want to make a note that this really wants to be done by some service. So pass this logic to a service that handles the database storage fetching. Basically, this will go to something like Entity Framework. For now, just do it direct in here. So this is letting us know that we need to change this code, but we haven't done the Entity Framework stuff yet, so that can stay there. And all we'll do is say if the print list dot count, and we need to select them based on the ID. So if the item ID isn't equal to 1, say, in our case, what's it complaining about now? Inside of here seems to have lost IntelliSense. So what is the problem? Maybe we just need to add system.link up here and it's not figuring it out. Yep, so the IntelliSense is just not very smart there. It just would not figure out that that's a link expression and import it. So basically we'll check that the print list has this item with ID, and for now we're not going to really care if it's more than one. We're just going to delete the first ID. It doesn't really matter for now. And I've actually just noticed we've got the same ID here. So they want to be different IDs. And then I guess what happens here is if it isn't equal to 1, well, yeah, actually, if it isn't equal to exactly 1, we can just, I guess, throw here would typically be something to do. Throw or warn. But for now, we'll just return and do nothing. So that's probably another to do, how to handle a situation when if you ever manage to click something and press delete, but it doesn't exist here. And this will be because this will ultimately be living in some kind of database service, and maybe this item has disappeared since clicking the button and the UI is out of sync. And then finally, you would remove the item. And again, this we're just working on the view model directly for now. So we'll just do remove. And we need to remove the item, so we need to then find the item. So it will be the list count dot first, and we know it exists because this check will catch it first. And it's just when the ID equals the ID passed in. And that should remove it from the list. Now the trick will be, how do we invoke this delete print item method that's on the class above? Then we need to do it with some kind of binding to this button. So we know we need a command on this button here to do something, and we need to invoke the parents method or the parents relay command. So the way we do that is we do the binding and we do this kind of CSS selector syntax, which is really powerful. If we put a $sign then .parent, this would go up one level. If we do a parent and open close the square brackets and say list box, this will jump up from inside of this item template up to this list box here. This list box is then bound. Its data to context is the action page view model. You can see that here in the grey, and that's what we need to get access to. So all we have to do is bounce up to that list box there. We want to select the ultimately the data context of that list box. But you can see at the minute it doesn't understand what the data context will be. So you can see it's got a data context, but that's going to be an object, and we need it to be the actions page view model. So we need to open this, do VM. We want to cast it to the view model type we know, which is the actions page view model. And then we can close that off. And now we've ultimately cast the data context to the view model that we know it's going to be. And finally, we can now call the delete print items command. And the last step is obviously passing in the command parameter. So this method here is expecting a string of ID. And in order to pass it into a command, there is a command parameter. And we'll just bind that to the ID of the item we've got selected. And that should be enough to fire. It's given us a 1 of the null value, which is obviously valid in a sense here. It doesn't understand that this could or couldn't be valid. But for now, I'm happy to leave that as a warning. So if we run, well, in fact, if we just compile it, it should work in design time as well. We click here and click delete. It should delete the all printings drawing. And there we go. Delete only drawings, delete them. So that looks like the delete working. Let's just check it works in the application. Go to the actions page, click something, delete. And if we tab out and tab in, it should refresh the list, which is correct. That's exactly what we want. Because we have the refresh firing, and that's firing off to what would be a database refresh. So it's ultimately this would be the database refresh, which if this was the database delete, when the refresh came in from the database, it would then sync in. But because there is no backing store at the minute, it's all static code. That's why you see the behavior. But we have all the implementation correct now. We have everything where it needs to be. These two are ready to pass off to some kind of service that we can inject through dependency injection and start doing some database calls. I think first what we'll do though is finish off the UI for the actions page, or at least for the print page here, because all we need to do now is fill in all this UI, and every time we select these, we can fill out the information here. And then when we do all the deleting things, we can start committing these to database. So let's finish up this page's UI first, bind it all correctly, finish with like the save options to add. So you can add a new item, name it, and do all that lot first. Then once we know the general view is working, we'll store this in a static database service in the background.